deregulated markets were supposed to set us free, right? Here's the libertarian dream. Leave the free market alone and it will sort it all out for you, from foot cream to mortgages to everything else, through innovation and endless choice. But the reality feels more like being waterboarded by fine print. Every year you spend days just trying not to get screwed. On internet deals, car insurance, home insurance, travel insurance, gas, electricity deals, car rentals, flights, train tickets. Each one a fresh bureaucratic nightmare. What's that? 19 quid for a London-Manchester train ticket? Pfft, what a deal! Free market in action. Oh, it only applies if you travel at 3 AM, change 3 times and book 4 months in advance. Thanks, bruh. Otherwise, £400. Enjoy! Even if you win the deal, you feel like crap for all the time that it cost you, and you're riddled with anxiety. Will that car rental fine me £1,000 for using Visa rather than MasterCard? Or will my home insurance even cover wind damage or just flooding? Who knows? I don't know about you, but I'd rather pay more just to not have to care. Isn't that the whole point of paying somebody for a good service? Convenience? Now, this libertarian idea that the free market will just solve everything on its own rests on a few assumptions. The first one is that consumers always have perfect information, which means they can easily deal with both insurance products and phone contracts. The second assumption is that consumers will always make rational and even optimal decisions, so they won't go for short-term gains if it means long-term losses. These two assumptions give rise to the third one, which is that good products will eventually win out because the consumers will simply stop buying the bad ones. But this is not reality. In reality, consumers never have perfect information, either because the information is hidden in fine print, buried in jargon, or constantly shifting terms and conditions, but it's also because most people have lives, jobs, kids, deadlines. Nobody's got time to read 47 pages of terms and conditions every time they create an account. This messy reality gives service providers the upper hand every single time. Okay, you might say, so the reality isn't perfect, but surely good products win out eventually, right? Sometimes, but not reliably. See, for example, crypto scams. We'll get back to that. And even when they do win out, it sometimes takes a massive body count. See, for example, snake oil salesmen of the 19th century. We'll get back to that in a second as well. So it seems that when the market has no guardrails, it doesn't really reward quality. It rewards manipulation. Oh, you might say, slow down there. This is a big claim. We're going to need to back it up with a little bit of evidence, don't you think? And yes, you are absolutely right. Let's look at the evidence together. The 19th century was a libertarian utopia. It was a no-rule free-for-all as far as the consumer was concerned. And there were some problems, to put it mildly. This was peak snake oil era, a time when anybody could sell anything, from actually useful stuff to downright poisons. An example of this is the Mrs. Winslow soothing syrup, invented by a random US lady back in 1845, that was advertised to young mothers as a means to soothe their crying, teething babies. It was quite popular because it was actually pretty good at what it was supposed to do, which in retrospect shouldn't really be that surprising because it contained, surprise surprise, morphine. The result, of course, was widespread infant overdose and death, never really fully accounted for because the environment was such an unregulated Wild West. And all of this was entirely legal. This magical syrup was actually sold for a full century until 1930, when it was finally banned. And it wasn't just about tainted medicine, it was about tainted food as well. In 1858, a batch of tainted sweets killed 20-odd people and poisoned some 200 more in Bradford in the UK. This was apparently caused by an enterprising confectioner putting a dash of arsenic in his batch of sweets for that sweet, sweet metallic kick. Other common additives to spice up the Victorian diet included chalk, which was often used as a cheap filler in flour and other powders, for example, lead compounds, which made cayenne pepper a beautiful red color, and copper sulfate, which turned pickles attractively green. And all of this was completely halal, because the food market wasn't really regulated. So, the market didn't fix any of this. This stuff went on for many decades, until governments finally decided to step in. The UK led the way with the Pharmacy Act of 1868, which restricted the sales of opiates and poisons to qualified chemists only, and it followed it up with the Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875, which made it illegal to mix toxic additives into staple foods. Okay, we've got the basics covered, boys. The US took a little while to get going, but in 1906 finally came up with the Pure Food and Drug Act, which banned misbranding and required manufacturers to slap ingredients lists on their products. This act also led the government to remove unsafe products from the market. So that was a good first step, but to be honest, the protections were still pretty weak and poorly enforced, and one huge loophole remained. No safety testing was required to bring new medicines to market. Enter the elixir sulfonilamide disaster of 1937. In the US, a bunch of enterprising young lads working for a pharmaceutical company decided that the powdered antibiotics that they sold were just a little bit too boring and the consumers didn't like them too much, so they thought, why don't we turn this into a syrup? So they tried to, but they couldn't find a substance that would dissolve the antibiotic. So one of the guys spent months in the lab tinkering around until he finally discovered that diethylene glycol, also known as antifreeze, was pretty good at dissolving the stuff. Now, I don't need to tell you that drinking antifreeze is a really bad idea, because you're gonna die a slow and painful death, but these guys didn't care. Or maybe they didn't know. They were like, we've got it, boys. Made a huge batch and wheeled it out to pharmacies across the US. Unsurprisingly, this resulted in some 100 plus deaths, which included a lot of children. Now, the predictable outrage, of course, led to the 1938 Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act, which was a good thing because from then on, at least, drugs had to be safety tested in the US. But the broader point is that market freedom was so important that tons of children needed to die before anything was done about this. But you might say, that was then. That was then. They had no standards. We know better now. So you think it's all Gucci now, do you? Think again. Protecting consumers is a constant uphill battle. Every time regulators close one loophole, the free market opens up another. Those first interwar regulations were nice, but bad stuff kept happening all across the 20th century and into the 21st century. In the mid-20th century, for example, tobacco companies suppressed evidence linking smoking to lung cancer. That went on for decades, and when regulation finally came in, it was only after tens of millions of deaths worldwide. Or let's look at leaded petrol. It was around for many decades until enough evidence finally piled up that it was really bad for you. By some estimates, it accounted for 1.2 million deaths every year and decreased the global IQ by about 5 to 10 points. And it's not just consumer health that suffers from a lack of regulation. It's also our wallets. Let's look at the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, when risky home loans were bundled into opaque financial products and then sold to pension funds and investors as a good deal. When this stuff finally blew up, it nearly collapsed the global economy. It jacked up inequality, and we're still feeling the fallout 17 years later. Or let's look at the latest iteration, crypto. Now crypto, this is a libertarian dream in its purest form. Unregulated, hard to trace, global, and definitely no tyrannical governments involved. Now crypto has got an illustrious track record, to say the least. As early as 2011, we had the Mt. Gox exchange, which lost some $350 million over the course of 3 years to hackers until it finally collapsed in 2014. Then we had the Bitfinex exchange, which lost some $72 million to hackers in 2016. Then we had the Nice Hash exchange, which lost another $70 million in 2017. And we had the Coincheck exchange, which was hacked for some $400 million in 2018. It's been over a decade, and things are just getting worse over time. You still remember that video of a dancing Sam Bankman-Fried, right? The guy led the FTX exchange, which was advertised as the next best thing since sliced bread, until it suddenly collapsed in 2022, setting some $32 billion on fire. People lost their entire life savings in this disaster. And let's not even get into the latest meme coin pump and dump schemes. It's a waste of time. The point is, this is a pattern. Every time markets are left to just sort themselves out, consumers get hurt. Self-correction without regulation is a myth. That was all a bit much, wasn't it? Let's go back to lower stakes issues, things like phone contracts and car insurance. The first point I want to make is that complex products with unreadable fine print and dodgy cancellation policies, those aren't a bug. They're a business strategy. And this is not just the ramblings of a paranoid guy on the internet. A 2023 study from the London School of Economics found that among the UK telecoms, product obfuscation proliferated at the time when 4G technology came out, taking advantage of consumers' ignorance. There were more bundles and vague fees and unclear contracts. The result, of course, was that comparisons were harder to make for the consumer. Confusion became a sort of competitive advantage for these telecoms. Why is that? It's because, obviously, complexity kills transparency. It's hard to tell if you're getting a bad deal, so you'll just probably go with the known brand or the cheapest looking option, even if it's misleading and it's hiding the true cost from you and is trying to upsell you on add-ons. Point number 2 is that markets don't seem to punish complexity at all. Informed customers are a minority. Most of us can't be bothered. We don't have the time, we don't have the mental bandwidth, and ultimately we've got other priorities in life. The other thing is, the way that things are set up, honest companies just lose to the guys playing dirty. If you show the full cost, you'll always lose to the guy showing the teaser rate that's 75% off for the first 2 months. Point number 3 is that companies exploit consumer psychology. Large corporates, they employ teams of marketers and psychologists. You think they don't know how to play you like a fiddle? They know exactly that you'll take that discount now and then make big plans about how you're going to cancel it later. And they know you'll procrastinate. And then when you finally try to cancel, break a leg I suppose, you need to call during business hours, then navigate through menu options that are 8 layers deep, then you get disconnected once or twice, then you get through and you get put on hold for an hour. Then finally you reach Steve, the retentions guy, who's gonna argue with you for another 20 minutes and try to make you feel guilty about cancelling your plan. Now fixing all of this is possible, but it requires collective action. It requires pressure groups and voter mobilization, but this is really hard to do when the pain is so spread out. An hour here, 30 quid there. It's not really enough to justify spending days writing emails to political representatives and ombudsmen. Enter the comparison website, the free market's favorite coping mechanism for its own complexity. The idea is to easily compare deals side by side and just kind of automate the decision process and stop worrying so much about the fine print because the website's going to do it for you. On the surface, they seem to do a pretty good job. They are used by 85% of people in the UK, 96% of whom said they were fairly or very satisfied. They're widely seen as convenient, quick, and empowering. But scratch the surface a little bit and the trust starts to erode quite quickly. Only about half the consumers trusted the sites to treat all suppliers equally or to handle personal data ethically. And in at least one case, these suspicions were justified. In 2020, Compare the Market, one of the most popular price comparison websites in the UK, was fined some £18 million by the UK Competition and Markets Authority. Why? because it signed dodgy contracts with suppliers that prevented these suppliers from offering lower prices on other websites. The result were artificially inflated home insurance prices, meaning that consumers paid more while the website collected that sweet, sweet commission. And this is not just a one-off case. A 2019 study on UK energy comparison websites found that it's basically an oligopoly. Two websites are responsible for 70% of all customer switches. Unsurprisingly, such market concentration gives cover to all sorts of dodgy business practices. Many sites, for example, showed only a subset of all deals available on the market and promoted sponsored or preferred listings. These listings nudged users towards suboptimal choices so websites could rake in better commissions. In short, comparison tools do reduce friction, but they introduce new layers of distortion. The main problem is that you think you are navigating the free market, but you're really just being funneled to whoever paid for placement. Now, comparison sites might waste a few quid here and there, but choice overload isn't always a minor annoyance. Here's a scenario. You are on holiday in Sicily. Magical towns, tasty arancini, beautiful women. You go for a walk along a rocky beach and oh shit, you slip, you break your leg. It's an open fracture, you're bleeding like you're in Kill Bloody Bill. So you call an ambulance. Luckily you do have mobile reception, and when it finally arrives after some 30 minutes, you are already lightheaded and queasy. The paramedic goes, "Guardi signore, you have lost a lot of blood, okay? We need to get you to an hospital ASAP. There is an hospital in Palermo 10 minutes from here, but your insurance will not cover it." So what do? Do you go to the closest hospital and risk losing your house to medical bills? Or do you wait an hour to get to the insurer-approved one and roll the dice on your life? You think this is an exaggerated, silly example? Well, only a little bit. Welcome to US health insurance, basically. Here's a true story. In 2017, a guy called Drew Calver, 44 years old, had a heart attack. He was taken to the nearest hospital in Austin, Texas. The guys there thankfully saved his life, but the hospital was out of his insurance provider's network, so it wasn't quite clear who would pay for the treatment. Luckily for him, his insurer stepped up and paid some $56,000 in treatment costs. But Drew was still billed an extra $109,000 in balance billing, whatever that means. Luckily, he ended up paying only $300 or so in the end, but only after major media coverage. So this story has a happy ending, but Drew could have easily gone bankrupt if it weren't for the coverage. Now, things have improved since then, sort of. The 2020 No Surprises Act covers emergencies like Drew's, but it's still full of gaps. Ambulance costs, for example, often just not covered. When you call 911, the dispatcher simply calls the closest ambulance in your vicinity, regardless of whether it's in your network or not. This means that you are rolling the dice every time you ring the ambulance. And the median surprise bill for ground ambulance is some $450. That's kind of okay, right? But for an airlift, it could be over $20,000. And if transport isn't medically necessary, the insurer can simply refuse to pay. But the problem is, how do you know if it's necessary in the middle of a crisis? One Colorado man with a heart condition thought he was having another heart attack, and because he was somewhere in the sticks, he rang an air ambulance to take him to the hospital. His insurer slapped him with a $94,000 bill because the transport apparently wasn't medically necessary. So despite the stratospheric cost of health insurance in the US, you are still playing emergency roulette. Is this the kind of world you want to live in? Where you have infinite choice, but every decision could potentially bankrupt you? Now some might say, well, that's just how it is. That's the price of freedom. You want to regulate the free market? What are you, a commie or something? This is a false choice. We already use a ton of tools to protect consumers, yet we still have more choice than ever. But abuse keeps happening, so why don't we make those tools even better? The first tool are public comparison websites. like Norway's Finansportalen. It's a regulator-run, unbiased website that takes no commission from suppliers. This removes the dodgy incentive to peddle rubbish deals, unlike the de facto oligopoly of commercial price comparison websites in the UK. The second tool is good regulation. One example of this are mandatory comparison templates. The Insurance Product Information document in the EU and UK is a simple one-page template that lists what is covered by the policy, what is not covered, where are you covered, are there any restrictions, how do you cancel. In the US, you've got the Summary of Benefits and Coverage, or the SBC. It's a simple 5-page document, a bit like IPID, but for health insurance instead. It lists key facts such as deductibles and what is covered in plain, simple language. In the US, you've also got the Schumer box, which is a simple template for credit card providers which lists all the fees and all the interest rates for different transactions. The other element of good regulation are bans on dodgy practices. In 2022, for example, the UK banned price walking, and in 2024, the US banned junk fees for hotels and event tickets. So we are making progress, but we need more. Just last month, for example, BT tried to jack up my internet bill by about 13% after my contract had expired. I thought price walking was banned, but ISPs are apparently exempt for whatever reason. Now, listen to this. What if instead of 100 crappy options, we lived in a world where you could only choose from 5 decent ones instead? Maybe freedom isn't about having more options, but about not having to worry every time you make a choice. And if you like this production, consider subscribing and tuning in for more in the future.